Okay. All right. Well, what do you think? Should we start or wait another minute?
I think we can start.
We can get started. Sounds good then. So, welcome. So can while I go through the intros, if somebody can admit people while they're coming in, that'd be great. So we can move on. So, bienvenidos a todos and welcome to our San Francisco Bay Area Coalition's training series. My name is Berta McDonald and I'm on the steering committee of this Bay Area Coalition and leader of the training committee. We are thrilled that you are here for a workshop of Spanish for Activists training because talking to every single voter is how we win this fall, and reaching out to the Latino community is absolutely essential. So thank you for being here. But first, next slide, next slide, please. A few housekeeping items. This workshop lasts for about 1.5 hours. We taught it this version of this in 2020. And 2022, and it has been updated for this year's election. And we'd be grateful for your feedback at the end of the class. So we're really honored to have all of you join us today, and we'll have opportunities for everybody to practice in small groups. But in general, if you could please keep yourself on mute, except for when being recognized to speak, that will help keep the flow going. Next slide. And before we start, a little bit about the Bay Area Coalition. We are a group of 45 grassroots organizations and Democratic County committees who got together to support each other in our work, organizing phone banks, canvassing efforts, and voter registration drives. Rudy here being one of the founding members who's going to lead this training today and instrumental in making it all happen. So to learn all about us, Mayela is going to post a link in chat, which links to our website, so you can get more information about us. Next slide. And we invite you to take action with us. We are holding phone banks every Wednesday and Saturday. Our focus is on the California, Central Valley, Arizona, and Nevada, and we are a DNC hub for the Biden campaign as well. We also have many canvassing and voter registration opportunities, which Peggy is one of our big leaders there in the Central Valley and throughout the electoral season. And if you scan the QR code on the slide there, it will link to all of our events. Next slide. And we've also partnered with Women's March Action, and they will be running Spanish language phone banks, a breakout room in our Wednesday phone banks every Wednesday. And so I hope after this training, you'll feel ready to join us tomorrow and practice what you learn and bring all your Spanish speaking friends too. Next slide. And we have more trainings lined up for those wanting to test canvassing waters. We offer a training every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Where you can learn all about the tools we use and what it takes to canvass. And next June 20th, we offer a similar training for volunteers who haven't phone banked in a while and may need a little refresher, and also for those new to phone banking ready to take the plunge. Next slide. Oh, no, it's the same one. Sorry. And more trainings coming up. Next on Tuesday, January 11, we have a persuasion training that's led by Laura Tarek, the Arizona State House Representative, who we helped elect in 22. And you will learn essential political persuasion tools and how to bring others to your side with her. And we also have a great training connecting with voters for abortion. It's also an encore that we did that last fall, led by Jillian McLeod Tariff. As you know, abortion is going to be one of the leading topics of motivators for voters this year. So this will be June 24th, which marks the anniversary of the Dobbs decision. So please check out the link in chat for signing up for any of those. And also, I'd like to talk a little bit about the messaging library. There's a link for you to check that out too, which is something, some of our partners together, we've been building this library based on Anat Shenker-Osorio's 3V's Talking Point, which gives us tools to communicate with voters on hot button issues. Basically, the principle is like, we all have something in common, like we all deserve freedom, we all need to eat and have decent health care. Everybody agrees on that. But the villains, which are always MAGA Republicans wanting to use inflation as excuse for corporations gouging, or many topics. We have broken down in several different categories, like, talking on abortion, talking on education, talking on all the hot button issues. And the vision is, when we elect Democrats, things get better, just in general. So I hope you use that when you're talking to people going forward, so to voters. But now I'd like to just introduce you, next slide, please, to our trainer, Rudy Espinosa. Rudy was one of the co-founders of the Bay Area Coalition, and he originally worked as the Democratic Party's field coordinator for the Peninsula back in 2020, having successfully organized more than 10 million calls to voters in California. That's a whopper, and about a dozen more states during the 2020 presidential election. He helped unify multiple groups like local Democratic clubs, various central committees in the Bay Area, and also progressive activist groups to form the Bay Area Coalition. And I would also like to introduce Mayela Galindo, who has worked with Elizabeth Schur in developing the Spanish for Activists model. She will be assisting us with the training. Mayela is a native of Oaxaca, Mexico, where she lives, and she has been a language teaching degree from the Universidad Autónoma de Benito Juárez in Oaxaca, and has been a Spanish and English teacher for 9 years. So, Rudy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Berta, and I appreciate you helping to organize this call. It is very much needed training. I think we have a history as a party to kind of leave Spanish speakers or Latinos on the wayside, and I'm so glad that Bay Area Coalition is continuing to focus on our community. So welcome, everyone. My name is Rudy Espinosa. I am currently in Rochester, New York, but I spent until November of last year a few years in the Bay Area, and really diving deep into politics and organizing and looking to make change, as I know all of you on this call are. I'm grateful for Berta and for Mayela to be here to help me do this today. And I'm a little rusty, I'll be honest. I haven't done a training like this in maybe over a year. So I ask for your patience and I hope that you'll be able to learn a lot today. I have a question for everyone. I want to make sure that folks are comfortable. Are you comfortable if I speak Spanish and I do it in a slow way, if I speak Spanglish? Or are there some of you who feel like I probably should do it in English so that you understand? So if you can write in the chat and say Spanish is fine, or say I may have some trouble, I may ask some questions, and that's fine too. As I'm speaking and you want to type in the chat, if I'm speaking in Spanish, you want to type in the chat, what does that mean? I'm happy to explain it. So if I see a few Spanish is fine. If a Spanish is not fine, let me know. Either, okay, Spanglish or Spanish is fine. Español está perfecto, me gusta. Entonces creo que voy a cambiar al español y voy a hablar despacio. I will speak slowly, and I'll probably be switching from one to the other. I hope that works. If you have a question about my Spanish, si tienen una pregunta de mi español, write in the chat, and I'll ask Mayela and Berta to interrupt me and ask the question. And that is okay, because estamos aquí para aprender. We're here to learn.
Okay, there are two people who Spanglish or so Spanish would be easier for them.
Awesome. Okay, so voy a cambiar a español y también voy a traducir en inglés. Unas cuantas cosas que quiero hablar el día de hoy, a few things I want to talk about today. Comenzando con los objetivos de la llamada, or the objectives of the call. Y es, uno, practicar y aprender las palabras y frases que usamos cuando hablamos de la política. So talk about practicing and learning words and phrases that you can use in politics. No se trata de hablar perfectamente. Spanglish está bien. It's not about speaking perfectly. Spanglish is just fine. And it's really to learn how to communicate to our voters. We're here to learn that. Estamos aquí para aprender a cómo comunicarnos con los votantes. So un poco o el contexto sobre las campañas. We're currently working with two crucial races, Rudy Salas and Adam Gray, as part of the Bay Area Coalition. And these campaigns have their own scripts and details that are very specific to those efforts. So we're not going to exactly go into or cover those specific scenarios in the workshop, but instead we want to share some phrases and some communication tips and tricks that would be appropriate for you to use in a variety of situations, whether or not it's these specific campaigns. Entonces, la idea es que nosotros podamos hablar sobre diferentes escenarios en este taller y aprender las frases que pueden utilizarse en una variedad de situaciones, no solamente en las campañas de Rudy Salas y Adam Gray. Lo otro es que tenemos unos guiones específicos, que no vamos a entrar en los guiones específicos de las carreras, pero más enfocarnos en esas frases, so talking about going into more the phrases in different situations. And if you have questions about the districts or races specifically, I would say that you probably want to save those for when you're in a training or in a phone bank or in a Canvas for those specific races. If something is like really, really itching for you to know, we have Berta here who can answer some of the questions later. All right. Lo primero que vamos a hacer cuando nosotros estamos trabajando como voluntarios en una campaña es revisar el guión. The first thing we want to do is go over the script. It's probably one of the most important tools that we have or resources that we have in any campaign. Uno de los recursos más importantes que tenemos en una campaña es el guión. ¿Por qué? Porque tiene la información clave que necesitamos y las respuestas claves que podemos dar durante una conversación. Why? Because we can have the questions and answers that are really key to a campaign, to a candidate, all in one document. Lo importante del guión es saber personalizarlo y que nosotros podamos hacer el guión nuestros. The idea is that we make the scripts our own. Scripts are not intended to be read verbatim. Los guiones no tienen la intención de que lo leamos palabra por palabra igual como está escrito, sino que lo hagamos personal y que sea una conversación. The idea is that it's conversation. So the recommendation, take 10-15 minutes to review any script, even more time if you need, for you to get familiar with not only the candidate, but the issues and how the candidate's positions on those issues. I'm going to pause right there. Are there any questions? Is everyone understanding so far? If you can give me a thumbs up on the reactions or put in the chat, good. Thumbs up in the camera. All right. And is everyone okay with me switching over from Spanish to English? Is my Spanish clear enough so far? Okay, 3 thumbs up. All right, thanks. So going over today's format, it's really geared towards folks that are kind of at least at an intermediate level in Spanish. But everyone is welcome. And if you're not an intermediate level Spanish, that's okay. We're going to do breakout groups later on in practice, and we'll do for those folks who are just starting. And then we'll have other groups for folks that are intermediate or advanced levels so that you're in an appropriate level breakout room. And the things that we're going to learn is establishing trust or generando confianza con los votantes, establishing trust with the voters. How we communicate, cómo nos comunicamos, how we introduce ourselves, cómo nos presentamos, and we're going to do some activities to connect what we're learning and putting them into practice. So voter ID, some candidate introductions, etc. Okay, construyendo la confianza. So one of the things about Spanish speakers and Latinos in general is that when we get phone calls from people we don't know, a lot of times we're very suspicious, but we also respond to it in different ways, like, different cultures do. So something that's important for us when we're talking, whether knocking on the door, it's guión, I know, I'm so sorry. Thank you, I appreciate that, Mayela. I don't even know why I did that. That we are focused on establishing that trust by being very respectful, listening. So not only being the only ones to talk, but allowing us to hear what the other person has to say. Some of the experiences I've heard from other folks is that when they spend some time doing these things and being very respectful, listening, is that they tend to be even nicer than non-Latinos, right? Than white folks, for example, or like non-Spanish speaking folks. And I've heard this over the years, and it's very, very interesting because it has been my personal experience as well, that when someone hears someone speaking their language in a different country, they tend to be more comfortable. I don't understand why, but that's just the way it is. The other thing is to mention the name of the candidate a few times during the conversation. And that is so that not only are you creating some like name recognition, but again, building that trust. I'm going to switch over to Spanish. Es súper importante cuando estamos hablando con los latinos, que inicialmente pueden iniciar la conversación de una manera dudosa o suspicaces, pero a través de ser muy respetuoso, escuchar y no solo hablar, podemos generar esa confianza con el votante, y también poder presentar al candidato. Y la idea es que nosotros durante la conversación mencionemos el nombre del candidato varias veces con la expectativa que el votante se acuerde y reconozca el nombre. Y ahora, ¿cómo nos comunicamos? Entonces, en español, la palabra de comunicar o cómo nos comunicamos puede significar dos cosas diferentes. Uno, comunicar puede ser que voy a informar. Si yo voy a comunicar algo, es simplemente dejar saber o informarle a otra persona que algo va a pasar o de algún hecho. Por ejemplo, como recordar la fecha de la elección o un lugar de la votación. Cuando hablamos de comunicarse, por ejemplo, que nos comuniquemos, es un intercambio, es una conversación, incluye hablar, hacer preguntas, también escuchar y responder. Y lo que quiero es que nosotros aprendamos la frase para que nos podamos, para comunicarse pues con los votantes, que ustedes se puedan comunicar con los votantes. So here talking about how we communicate, is that there's different ways in we can communicate. One of them is that we can communicate something in the sense that we're just informing, right? Like letting someone know about the date of an election or a location for voting. Another is that we communicate, and that's sort of an exchange, which includes having a conversation, asking questions, listening, responding. And today we're going to talk about some phrases of how we can communicate together with voters, not just communicate to communicate with. So the first part is the presentation or introduction to the voters, or la presentación a los votantes, like how we like dive deeper with them, get to know them, introduce ourselves, why we're calling, that sort of thing. And in Spanish, something that doesn't exist in English is sort of this level of respect and conversation that is very much ingrained in Latino culture. And for different Latinos, it's different. For example, my parents are from Nicaragua, and we speak in usted to all of the adults, or everyone that we don't know. We speak to them in usted. We don't speak to them in tú, because it could be a sign of disrespect if you speak to someone in a familiar voice when they haven't given you that. So my recommendation in general, when speaking to someone you don't know in Spanish, is that we use usted. However, the voter themselves might offer for you to speak to them in tú. They can say, me puedes tutear, o me puedes hablar en tú, or they can start talking to you in tú form, which then is a signal to let you know that you can speak in tú form with that person. Recommendation, speak in usted form. And also being professional is speaking with first and last name. And there's also differences in how we talk to people when we pick up the phone or when we knock on the door. So I'm gonna share something about how we even say hello. So for example, if someone calls someone on the phone in Mexico, they don't really answer hola. They'll say, bueno, sí, dígame, bueno, which is very different from, for example, how it happens where my parents are from. Given that you would likely be calling the Central Valley with a very, very, very high rate of population of folks that are descendants of Mexicans or are originally from Mexico themselves, it's important to know this, because if you were taught Spanish a certain way and then someone answers the phone using terminology you've never learned, then it might be a little difficult for you to enter that conversation. The other thing is that someone can ask you, like, who's calling, or pueden preguntar de parte de quién, right? That means on behalf of who. So that's when you would say, I'm so and so, I'm calling from, X campaign. So, hablando de cómo saludamos, es importante entender que dependiendo del país o el origen de la persona que está hablando, contestando la puerta o contestando el teléfono, pueden responder de una manera diferente. Por ejemplo, en México, es muy raro que una persona en México conteste el teléfono como hola. Muchas veces dicen bueno, sí, bueno, dígame. Y si fuera de la puerta, so we're talking about how someone answers the door, someone might say, ¿en qué le puedo ayudar? Can anyone tell me what that means? You can just
Otra vez, dígame otra vez.
¿En qué le puedo ayudar?
How
Oh,
can I help you?
How can I help
Yeah,
you?
how can I help you? Which is probably a way that someone might answer the door instead of saying something like, yes, how, can I help you with anything? Or just thinking about the different ways in which people can answer the phone or the door, just keeping that in mind. And what it means, right? Because bueno means good, but someone from Mexico is asking you, like, hi, how can I help you? That's basically what they're telling you in different words. And other words, like saying things like mande. Can anyone tell me what mande means?
And tell me.
Mande, yeah, it could be like, what? Tell me, go ahead. So it really depends on the tone. Just like in English, right? When we can say the same word so many different ways, and how we say it, how we use it really, really matters. All right, so going here, Monday. All right. So this is one of the resources that we have for y'all, and oh my gosh, sorry. This always happens where slides just move just because my thumb is over my mouse. We have a document that has broken down into different sections, and we'll share this with you. But this is one piece of it that really just starts off the conversation. So I am actually going to do the following. I'm going to share the document itself because it's going to be much easier and it won't be moving. All right. Can everyone read what's on my... Can everyone read the document?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Awesome. So this is basically, and I don't even know why. This is basically a script that we've set out for you that breaks down the different sections of a conversation in Spanish. And if you notice, we have here like ring ring or toc toc. So ring ring just really means the phone ringing, and knock knock, right? If you're knocking on the door. And on the left side, you'll see it in Spanish, the right side in English. And the grayed out area is what we think the voter could possibly say to you. And the white is what you as a volunteer could be using as conversation starter. So what we, sorry, I'm like, one of the things that we've done here is breaking up to different sections. So how do you introduce yourself? how you can begin saying you're a volunteer, and start introducing the candidate, and then how to respond depending on whether the volunteer is doubtful or suspicious, or maybe they're trying to rush you off the call or shut the door, so that you can just sneak in, those few seconds for you to get your message across. So if we look down here, for example, if the volunteer sounds dubious or suspicious, right, or hesitant, you could say something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to bug you. I just want some time with you," or, with all due respect, just a few questions, right? Is those little words that can just buy you some time enough to be able to talk about the candidates, the issues, and be able to identify the voter. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to go here. So what we're going to do, since we have those documents shared, we want to split into a few different groups. We'll divide into 3 groups, and luckily we're a small group here. I want you to tell us if you consider yourself a beginner in Spanish, intermediate level, or advanced. And we're going to go into 3 breakout groups. And what we're going to do is use that script that I was just sharing on screen. It'll take like 1 or 2 minutes to read through it. And then we're going to act like the voter. So Berta, myself, and Mayel will be the voter, and you will be the volunteer. And you're going to use what we've discussed and the script to navigate the different situations where a voter could be easily inaccessible, or one might be dubious, or one voter may be negative. So if you can, go ahead and indicate in front of your name, if you haven't already, of whether, if you don't know how to rename yourself, let us know, and we can rename you to beginner, intermediate, or advanced. And we're going to go into a breakout room so that we can practice our Spanish.
And
if you know how to rename yourself, just put it in the chat or speak up, and we will rename you so we can organize into groups.
And I added the script, link to the script is on the chat too. So if you guys want to use that.
Right. So intermediate. So Angie, I'll put you in intermediate. Judith, I'll put you in intermediate. Catherine, intermediate. Is there anyone else who I haven't called out who wants to be in the intermediate? Denisa, I'll put you in beginner, if that's okay. Peggy, intermediate. Anyone else? You can raise your hand on camera if you want to be intermediate. Bonnie? Okay, I think we have all the intermediate folks. And then for advanced,
I think there's Angie,
we
Jolie,
have
Anne, and Bonnie haven't.
Annie. What about Marga? What,
Marilee and Marga haven't. There's
Marely speaks Spanish. Marely already corrected my Spanish, so thank you.
that's it.
Spelled Guillon. I spelled it as a last name.
Oops,
So Marely, Marga, are you advanced, beginner, or intermediate? You're muted.
Sorry. Yes, I'm advanced. So avanzada.
Avanzada. Okay, Marga, te voy a poner avanzada. All right, so actually,
Intermediate.
let me. Okay. So we have Marga.
Marga's avanzada, yes.
¿Perdón?
Sorry, Marie and I were talking about other things we can add, because folks had questions about like, what if it's the wrong number, or how do we ask if this is the right number, things like that. So those are things that we can think about adding. So anyone want to share? Berta?
Pick one.
And those are things that we cover at every phone bank, like how to qualify the information when we talk to the voters, like, okay, this one's not home, this one's moved, this one hung up, or whatever. There's all these qualifications that we can run through. But we do that at the phone bank and show you how to do those things.
Yeah, they were asking like how to actually say it. Is this the right number? Right? Like,
Oh,
yeah. So
okay.
we can add that to this
To the boss read,
document,
yeah.
so that you'll know how to ask, like, is this the right number, or do they live here, right? Like that's the other thing, like so that you can mark on the checkboxes in the
Yeah.
script. Does anyone want to share their experience practicing?
I just want to say, Rudy, that we ran out of time and some didn't have the chance to practice.
Okay.
Apologize with those that last minute.
Oh, no worries. So what we'll do is we can start off with those who have not gone
Mhm.
to go first in the next round. Hopefully that gives folks an opportunity to practice. So
Perfect.
let me find my presentation so I can share that. Right here. Sorry, I have multiple screens. And there's different windows like documents and scripts and that sort of thing. So, righty. So the other part that I want to go into is going to this idea of expressions. So like I was talking about before, of even, you know, how a Mexican could answer the phone saying bueno and not hola. There's also a series of expressions that we may use that folks may not be aware of. So we just want to share some of those. So I want to ask, just to include some of our advanced or fluent speakers, do any of you want to speak to this and share some of these expressions like mande and bueno and comprendo and all these words, if you want to help me talk about them? So I know folks like Marga and Mareli who already speak Spanish. You don't have to, but if you want to share about some of these expressions.
You can unmute yourself.
I'm from Mexico, and even though we can speak really fast, when a message is conveyed to us, especially when it's about something we're absolutely not familiar with, it's to the volunteers' advantage if they speak slowly. I know that nervousness can start making us going like a train without brakes, but it's quite the contrary. If we are, if we speak slowly, the person on the other end, the person at home might go, "Oh, okay, I see. So you're a volunteer, okay," and that I think culturally it's more acceptable. It's okay. It's welcome. You're trying to engage in a conversation. Yeah, just my take.
Yeah, thanks, Mareli. Does anyone else want to add to that? Alrighty. So going on with some of these expressions, things like mande, as I mentioned before, could be like, excuse me, can you please repeat, or repita por favor, right? Can you please repeat that? Or hable más despacio. Things like bueno, órale. Bueno is like great. Or okay. Muy bien could be like very good. Órale is like wow. En serio is like seriously. Is any of these words new for any folks on here? This is the first time that. Do you hear any of these for the first time? Yeah. So for Judith, which ones are new for you? You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, and unmute yourself, please.
Nunca antes me usan órale.
Uh-huh.
We
En
make
serio. Es nuevo para mí.
Yeah, and orale, by the way, is very specific to Mexico. There is no
Right.
other Latin American country that uses orale. Like not even in Guatemala, right? Just like immediately south of Mexico. It's a very Mexican thing. And that's why we want to share these with you, because you might encounter that. And if someone says orale, we don't want you to be like, what? Now you know that
Really?
orale is like really something like really good, or like wow. So it's like it's a good thing. So if someone says orale or bueno,
And orale, I like to add, if they're giving you kind of like tú y usted, if they say orale, they really are, they're trusting you. There's this trust,
Mhm.
like orale, I like, all right,
Yeah.
they really are. If you hear orale, that's like they're agreeing with what you're saying, like orale, right on.
Yeah.
But if they don't use it.
Yeah.
Because you don't know the person, you're still at the very respectful level. Orale is just like between friends, good friends. But if they start with orale, then you're good to go. Orale is a welcome term. But if they don't use it first, then as volunteers, especially we're talking to them in usted, then we don't tell orale to grandma. I don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Just want to add something. All of these also is for when we're having a conversation, because we're comunicándonos with the voter. So when we're on the phone and someone is expressing their experience, their thoughts and everything, we don't want to be quiet on the phone as if no one was on the phone, right? So these are some expressions you can use to react on what they are saying throughout the conversation. Mhm.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Mayela, because it's really important that we're giving them that feedback, right? So that they're that active listening, right, when we're on the conversation, but also being aware of how you express that active listening, because like Marely said, if you're speaking in usted form, you're not gonna say orale, you might say bueno, right? Like you might use a different expression that's still professional and respectful, to demonstrate that you are listening. So it's very interesting, because it's a lot of the conversation that you're having with un Latino or a Spanish speaker is about culture, and it could differentiate how that person responds to you based on the words that you use and the expressions you use, of familiarity or of professionalism. And you might get the sense that as you're going through the conversation, they start to open up, they start to gain that trust, like we talked about before, right? Be respectful, be engaging, and they might give you that trust. And then you can start shifting your language based on how they're responding to you, right? So maybe by the end of the call, you might have that trust, you might be speaking into, you might be end up saying orale, or maybe not, especially if they're a lot older, or they're being very respectful and they want to keep that respectful line with you, because you were that way with them. So it really depends on the person, but it is a lot about culture. And again, you guys are going to have this. So you don't need to take notes on this or write it down, because we're going to share this document with you, but it's really about how you use these words, or how you take them in when you hear them yourself, and what they could mean to you. So this next part is an overview of the voter ID and issue ID and decision tree flowchart. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to show you a few different ways in which the conversation might unfold. So you'll see that, depending on questions that you're asking and depending on how they respond, you are going to go down different paths. So for example, the first part is you're introducing yourself. And once you get to the part of you're IDing the voter, right? Have you heard of the candidate, right? Have you heard of Rudy Salas? And if the answer is yes, that's great. You're already one step ahead. And then the next question is, if they've heard of him, is like, can we count on your vote? ¿Podemos contar con su voto? Si la respuesta es sí, if the answer is sí, again, that is great. You're headed down a really, really good path. And there, which we won't get into this today, but the next step o el siguiente paso es hacer un plan, ¿no? Que le decimos triplicar el voto. Es hacer un plan de votar, making a plan to vote, whether it's voting in person, votando en persona, votando por correo, voting by mail, so that you're having that conversation. And every time, I always share this when I've done trainings, is that a person is multiple times more likely to actually vote if they have a conversation with you about their voting plan. You've probably heard that. So it's really important. Es muy importante tener un plan de votar porque la persona tiene múltiples veces más chances que vayan a votar si dicen su plan en voz alta. And then the goodbyes, right? Las despedidas. So going back to IDing the vote, have you heard of Rudy Salas? ¿Has escuchado de Rudy Salas? No sé. All right, so sad face, because it's different, right? Or can we count on your vote? Podemos contar con su voto, contamos con su voto. Si la respuesta es no, ahí es importante que nosotros ya comencemos a identificar los temas de prioridad. Here it's like very important that we start identifying the issue areas, right, that are priority for the person. And again, this is about building that trust and being able to get those needs or what's interesting or what the voter is interested in. Aquí es importante continuar generando la confianza para poder lograr a entender cuáles son los temas prioritarios para el votante. After having that conversation, después de tener esa conversación de identificar las prioridades y si hay un alineamiento de las prioridades del candidato con el votante, es volver a preguntar la pregunta, contamos con su voto. After we've identified the issues areas and if we see that there are commonalities between the voter and the main issues for the candidate, then you can lead to the question again, do we count on your vote? And if the answer is no, I don't know, if there's a lack of assurance, is being able to send them to a resource, right? Because when you're in a phone bank, you got to move on to the next caller, right? So being able to send them to a resource like a web page where they can find their own information. Aquí, en este punto, si la persona dice que no sabe, si pueden contar con su voto, que no están listos para responder esa pregunta, es poder enviarle un enlace, digamos, aquí a un sitio web, ¿no? A la página web para que puedan investigar más sobre el candidato. And then the goodbye, right? And then you move on to the next voter. All right, so similar to what we did before, where we did the introduction, this is about IDing the voter and understanding where they are in that decision tree, right? If yes, they've heard of the candidate, if yes, they're ready to vote, or if yes, they've heard of the candidate, no, they're not sure if they're voting, or no, they've never heard of the candidate, and no, they're not voting, right? So there's multiple different scenarios that could stem from this, depending on the decision tree. And this is just a guide to help you respond to that and guide the conversation. Este simplemente es una guía de cómo podemos responderle al votante dependiendo del camino que tome, si responde sí, si conoce el candidato, o no, no conoce el candidato. Y si sí lo conoce, va a votar por él, sí o no. Si todavía tiene dudas, ¿cómo podemos entrar a los temas prioritarios para tener esa conversación de los temas y después volver a hacer la pregunta que si podemos contar con su voto? So these are a few different scenarios here where the voter is accessible, right? So if as a volunteer, I ask, ¿ha escuchado de Rudy Salas? La respuesta puede ser, sí, muy bien. And then respond, ¿qué piensa de ella? ¿Qué piensa del candidato? No? And here is about, yes, I've heard of this candidate, and you can respond with, have you heard, like, what do you think of this candidate, right? And generate that conversation. And there's different paths, different examples, right? You can thank them and then go into asking for their vote, or if they want to volunteer for the campaign, and things like that, right? And there's even one line about if we can have your phone number so we can call you about volunteering, right? So by the way, this applies to both phone banking and canvassing. So here's another example. If the voter is very supportive, sorry, these are the same, these are the same. And then if someone is doubtful and undecided, how you can have the conversation. Por ejemplo, si el votante nunca ha escuchado de Rudy Salas, usted puede decir, está bien, nosotros les podemos hablar un poquito de Rudy Salas, y algo que me interesa a mí es que él está apoyando en la inversión de las viviendas a precios asequibles, es una persona que está apoyando el seguro médico y los trabajos buenos, right? So I just made that conversation my own, where I talked about how he is going to prioritize affordable housing, healthcare, and good jobs. And again, remember, the idea here is that you make this script your own, but this is ways in which you can respond to a doubtful or undecided voter. So I'm going to pause right there. Are there any questions or any scenarios that maybe you've experienced that we can talk through?
Oh, Peggy,
Hey, go ahead, Peggy.
unmute.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to get into this or not, but a lot of times it's kind of unclear to me whether they would like to speak English or Spanish. And so I usually try to make an assessment. This is canvassing. And I'm just worried about offending people if I start to speak to them in my crummy Spanish. And especially younger people. I don't do it with older people. It usually seems, I can tell that they're somewhat grateful. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say it's something that I do, is I ask both at the same time in English and in Spanish, because it makes no assumption of what language they speak. So I would say, habla español, do you prefer English? And then they'll be able to respond immediately. Also, if there are other people around and you're asking somebody, ask everyone the same question, even if it's a white person, because you don't want to make the one person feel like, oh, because I look a certain way, you think I don't speak English. So that's happened to me. That actually happens to me all the time, especially on airplanes, where I'm coming from a Latin American country and they ask the person next to me in English, and then they look at me and they ask me in Spanish. That makes me angry, because they just made an assumption about me that I didn't speak English, right? And it can be irritating. So what I always say is ask in both languages and look at everyone and ask the same question, so that everyone feels the same. It shows that you made no assumptions, that you just want to determine what's the preferred language.
So just like, hi, do you speak English? Habla español.
Yeah.
Prefiere español. Just
Yeah.
real fast like that.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Anyone else have any other questions? All right. So I wanna go into another scenario in which we can start going down that guide. And again, we want to split you guys up into groups and take a few minutes to read the guide and see some of the examples that we have, so that you can do, again, the scenarios of whether the person is a little bit unsure, or they're already supportive, or negative, so that we have ways of responding. You think of the different ways, and if you've had experiences already, love for you to just use that and like kind of relive that experience, and how you could have handled that given this information. And for those of you that didn't get a chance to practice beforehand, it'd be a good opportunity for you to start off first. And also, Berta and Mayela, will you help me figure out time-wise? Because I know that it's already 6:43.
Yeah,
So
maybe if we do like 5 minutes or so, or a little
Yeah.
bit.
I think 5 minutes is good.
okay.
So
Yeah,
maybe
5 minutes, and maybe start off with the folks that didn't have that chance to practice in the first round, so that everyone has a chance tonight to practice a little bit.
Yeah, so what we'll do is, the idea is that you use this document, right, that has the identifying information And then sort of that follow that decision tree, right? If someone's supportive or if someone's unsure, that you can, it's all laid out for you there. And then beneath that, it'll have actual priorities for folks. We don't have one. We have them for Rudy Salas, sorry. We also have them for another, the Senator Cortez Masto that we used to support. We supported in the past. So you're able to actually use some of the real points for these candidates and put them into practice. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms. It's going to be, for me, it's 9:45, so that's 6:45 your time. So why don't can we take 7 minutes? Let's take 7 minutes. I'm just hoping that everyone gets a chance to do it.
All right.
And is that okay, Berta?
That's fine. Yeah.
All right. All right, so we'll take 7 minutes. And then I'll send y'all a warning, a few minute warning, and then we'll come back and.
All right.
All right. Sorry about that. All right, so did y'all have a question? Sounded like you guys were talking about something.
Yeah, Catherine has some questions.
Oh no, I was just curious. I was just killing time about you're recruiting native Spanish speakers. There's some of the people right here were incredibly good, and they're just claimed to be intermediate. So, but I just wondered about, is there a difference in reception between and in success between native Spanish speakers and those of us who are
no, it's a
trying?
good question. I will say the Latino community really appreciates when people try to speak Spanish. I can't tell you how much that means to a lot of people. So when someone is not intending to be perfect, which is, one of the things that I started with is like, it's not about being perfect. We can speak in Spanglish. It's about the effort. And in general, the Latino community is very appreciative when non-Spanish speakers really make the attempt to speak Spanish. Where it doesn't look so good is like when there's a Latino who does not speak Spanish. That's sometimes challenging for Latinos. And Mayela, you're probably right? Like when we expect the Latino to know, and when they don't, it's kind of like, why don't you speak Spanish?
Yeah.
So there's a different levels of reception depending on who you are. So if it's like a white person speaking Spanish, that's cool. We want to hear, like, let's engage. If it's a Latino who doesn't speak Spanish, it's like, oh, why didn't you speak Spanish? So it's a really good thing. And I know it can be a little embarrassing and hard because it's not your native language, but I promise you that if you're making the attempt, the person is likely to be very receptive and more likely to listen to you and have that conversation because you're making the attempt, and they're going to be very courteous to you. So it's quite the opposite of what you would normally get in an English-speaking call, where they might want to just get you off the phone real quick.
I heard the question differently, and that is there an effort on behalf of the Bay Area Coalition or the Democratic Party to recruit native Spanish speakers to be volunteers and work on phone banking and on canvassing?
I think that it's all the above. There is a big effort to recruit Latinos and Spanish speakers. That's always been a challenge. I started the Latinx Democratic Club of San Mateo County, and we got to about 60 members at one point, but only about 10 or so would actually show up to make phone calls. And when we would see like huge phone banks in English, right, where there's hundreds of people showing up, we just have like 2 or 3 dozen doing it in Spanish. So it's always been a challenge. If you know Spanish speakers, like I would say, please, like tell your Spanish speaking friends to sign up for the Spanish phone banks, because it is a challenge for us.
What do you think are the obstacles?
One is the lack of engagement in the Latino community overall in politics. Generally speaking, I've seen Latinos not really feel like they can make a difference. The other is, if you're foreign born and come to the US, you don't understand the system. So you didn't learn to phone bank in your home country. That's not something we do in Latin American countries. there is like door knocking and campaigns, but the campaigns, political campaigns, are run very differently. And it's not as ingrained in our culture to engage in the same way as we do in the US. And Mayela, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least like I partook in politics in Nicaragua, and it was really more about like parades and knocking on doors or like sort of like big splashy stuff than it was like that one-on-one contact.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really different here in Mexico too. Like we don't do phone banking or canvassing. It's more like parades, like in Nicaragua, a little bit less.
So I'm gonna, before we go, I'm gonna share in the chat so you'll have the phrase document that we've been using to practice, and then underneath that is a Spanish language glossary that has sort of the typical words that we use in everyday politics, so that we know what those are in Spanish. I'll tell you, even for me, as someone who was born and raised in the US, having to learn terminology in Spanish, political terminology, was quite the challenge because it wasn't something I commonly used. But this guide does really help. This glossary really helps like put those words, because sometimes even if you Google Translate, they don't translate correctly, and I've noticed that a lot. So it's really good to just like bookmark this glossary, and then also that the Spanish for Activists phrase list, or guion, the script. I'm gonna be working on it some more. I got some feedback of some potential things we can add to it, so I'll be adding more to it. And if you have some feedback for us, happy to take it of how we can make this better and easier for you. So yeah, with that, if there aren't any more questions that I can entertain, then I'll say y'all good night.